We now shift from system-level views to ground realities, understanding how industries and investors are translating this vision into practice. India's industrial transformation will define its climate journey, but this transformation must go beyond decarbonization targets. This plenary brings together industry leaders and investors who are actively shaping the just transition models, demonstrating that a people-centered approach not only builds social resilience, but also drives long-term economic value. We are privileged to have an outstanding panel to lead this dialogue. Moderating this session is Ms. Aisling McFerray, Program Manager for Just Transition at Impact Investing Institute. Joining her are Ms. Anjali Ravi Kumar, Chief Sustainability Officer at Eternal, Mr. Ankit Todi, Group Chief Sustainability Officer, Mahindra Group, Ms. Chaitra Nayak, Senior Program Manager, Just Transition Asia Investor Group on Climate Change, and Mr. Rajiv Kapahi, Co-Founder, Parinama. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed panelists.
Good morning, everyone. You can hear me okay? Perfect. Great. So welcome, everybody. It is great to be here for day 2 of the India Green Investment Forum. And a huge thank you to the team at IIC for putting all this together, especially Varun for helping out specifically on this session. My name is Aisling McCaffrey, so I'm a Just Transition Program Lead at the Impact Investing Institute in the UK. And yeah, delighted to be here again and back in India. So today we're going to have a pretty interesting conversation on unlocking investor action for a just industrial transition. So following on quite nicely from the previous panel, which was looking at mitigation and adaptation, I guess today for us, India's industrial transformation is critical for meeting its climate ambitions. But as we move towards decarbonisation, it's essential that the transition is just, inclusive and equitable so that we're protecting jobs, communities and livelihoods and creating opportunities for marginalised groups who are often left out of our large-scale economic shifts. So today we'll explore how investors and industries can play a catalytic role in helping sectors decarbonise whilst advancing social equity. And our panel brings together a range of experts from across investment and industry, each with unique perspective and experiences. So really happy to be here, and I think we will get stuck in straight away. And we'll set the stage by maybe understanding what we mean by a just transition in practice, and how policy and investor collaboration can help us drive it. And we'll start with some perspectives on that. So, Chaitra, I might start with you. And your recent report with the AIGCC looks at how markets like India, Indonesia, Japan, and Malaysia are really shaping, I guess, policy baselines for a just transition. And I'd like to start by just asking you, what does a just transition mean to you and stakeholders that you have engaged with? And maybe if you could give us some insight into NEC policies, signals or frameworks that could help investors engage with the just transition.
Thanks, Aisling. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Just a quick introduction. We're Asia Investor Group on Climate Change. We represent institutional investors, around 80 of them. We work across 11 markets across Asia, and the combined AUM of our investors stands at 40 trillion. So we really bring that institutional weight. So the report that you referenced on policy baselines, we just released it last month, and we looked at what do investors need to consider when it comes to engaging with policymakers on the topic of just transition. So on the 4 markets that you referenced, I think from perceiving just transition for us, I think sometimes the community that we work with, so the combination of corporates, investors, and policymakers, we sort of get hung up on definitions. But maybe if I had to qualify just transition in exactly 3 bullet points, they would be: 1, It needs to be sort of grounded in terms of the stakeholders it plans to address impacts for. So the combination of workforces, induced labor of supply chains, communities, household, these are the main sort of stakeholders of the just transition. So can just transition planning be sort of thought from the perspective of participatory inclusion of these stakeholders? That is one bullet point. The second one, it should be delivered on equitable terms. So we know no one left behind and nothing about us without us. So those need to be encoded in proper action. And then the last one is, so we know that just transition or justice is rather not embedded or hardwired in political economy. So it's an opportunity, like just transition as a thematic, as a work program, as a way of working. It's an opportunity for all of us to think about how to systemically sort of change the ways of working, whether it's a financial system, whether it's a policy system. So if we look at these three things, participatory action, looking at equitable delivery, and then systemically changing this, I think this sort of covers just transition broadly without getting sort of too technical on words. So that's one thing. And then I think on the policy baseline, right, one of our major takeaways on this report is that just transition is a policy aspiration for each of these markets. So Japan, India, Indonesia, and Malaysia. So if we look at the developmental plans of each of these 4 markets, they reference things like India's Viksit Bharat mission looks at energy affordability, Japan's GX plan looks at skilling for the next 1 year, and they've allocated funds to it. Malaysia has a reference to looking at increasing wages for low-income groups, and then Indonesia looks at adaptive cash transfers when it comes to disaster resilience. So each of these are referencing one sort of aspect of a just transition, but there's an entire system that needs to be codified outside of these 4 sort of major issues. So I would say just transition is a policy aspiration across these 4 markets, and the sort of most planned or well way to execute this would be from looking at economic diversification, again, which has a few early takers in each of these regions.
Amazing, amazing. That's great. Thank you so much for that insight. And maybe, Anjali, it'd be great to come to you next and just understand that, I guess, building on from what we've just heard from Chaitra, from a corporate perspective, what kind of, I guess, what real world challenges you face in ensuring that decarbonisation goals like fleet electrification or sustainable packaging also include workers and communities equitably. So it'd be great to hear maybe some examples from your work and some of those, how can some of those challenges be solved for?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Based on the definition that Chaitra just shared, I think I don't think a transition in India is possible without it being just. Like essentially the fact that we're you can say democratic nation and a socialist democratic nation. I don't think we can achieve transition effectively without taking the smallest or the most marginalized members of our community along. Because this will, the idea of excluding the masses from this transition, it makes no sense whatsoever. And we see that play out in, as you said, in our own decarbonization journey. So I represent Eternal, which is the owner of Zomato, Blinkit, Hyperpure, and District. Zomato is our food delivery business. Blinkit is our quick commerce business. Between the two, we have about over 6 lakh active delivery partners serving hopefully many of your households. But what you should know is that 90% of these partners are individuals who bring their own vehicle to deliveries, to undertake deliveries. So these are own personal two-wheelers actually, that they choose to use on a typically part-time basis, a flexible basis, to undertake deliveries, right? And and in the course of having a base of 600,000 plus active partners, we need to onboard something like 1 million plus people in a year. Now, those are very large numbers, and those also represent a lot of workers informal workers who do not have access to structured credit sources, right? Now, and that is where more than 50% of my emissions sit. And now, how do I begin to think about looking at a transition for that worker who is operating with me on a part-time basis? Average participation in a year is 50 days. They work maybe under 6 hours a day, because a lot of them have full-time jobs as security guards, waiters in the daytime, and they undertake deliveries at night. 20% are actually active students. So they're using their personal vehicle for going to college, coming back, and then undertaking deliveries, right? So how do I begin to think about transitioning them? And the fact of the matter is that, unfortunately, there are a couple of barriers that are clear. One is in the understanding of ultimately who needs to bear the risk. I talked about this in our pre-meetup, but I don't think we have a clear understanding of who needs to bear the risk of the transition, and how unfair it would be to impose that risk on the most marginalized members of society. Today, I cannot ask a young person barely out of college to buy an electric vehicle without financing and no guarantees around its resale, or even no guarantees around how much money he's going to make, because I have no idea how much time he's going to give to the platform, right? So this is a no guarantee kind of environment, and I can't further pass on any guarantees to financial institutions to lend him any money. So we're in a bind here where we have many marginalized members and informal workers powering our economy. India has 90% informal workers and 50% informal enterprises, or if our economy is 50% informal, and all of our gigantic corporations rests on this mountain of informality, right? What you're seeing is like tip of the iceberg. So the fact is that we don't have mechanisms today to distribute the risk in a way that might be fair on those informal actors. And we have to be very, very conscious of that. So in my head, it's very clear there is no transition possible without us doing the hard work that's necessary to understand how much risk can my delivery partner bear, how much risk can an entity like Eternal bear, how much risk should the government bear, how much risk should the financing organizations bear. We have not worked that out.
I think I'm back. Sorry. Thanks, guys. That was really powerful, Anjali. It's really powerful to hear that, and I think it's really clear to understand that we can't move forward without considering how we solve some of these challenges, and maybe we'll come back around to that in terms of what that could look like, maybe with partnership models, or how we can get more people involved. Ankit, kind of continuing on with your role in Mahindra from that kind of, I guess, corporate enterprise perspective. I'd love to hear from you about, how you balance emission reduction goals with social and employment outcomes across your group companies, and maybe if you can share, kind of in a similar way, any challenges or opportunities that you've faced in looking at this.
Thank you firstly for having me. Let me start by saying that, quote my MD, CEO, Chairman, purpose drives profit. That's sort of the philosophy on which the Mahindra Group is based. And in all our businesses, in our work, we sort of try and undertake activities that help that. both for our employees, workforce, but also our value chain partners, and there are quite a few million of them overall. So now, if I were to talk about the subject of just transition, just to begin with, our sort of deeper engagement on this terminology actually started about 4 years back, when we worked with the United Nations to create a series of about 5 or 6 papers, and this was a multitude of about 25 corporations around the world, to actually make the business case for just transition, that it's not a choice between profits and just transition and profits go hand in hand. So an entire series of papers got created around that, and that has sort of been our defining journey. And subsequently, in a number of businesses, some of the work that we have done have actually gone on to become global case studies around this topic. So I'm going to take one specific example with respect to the energy transition. Now, within the Mahindra Group, there are about 3 companies that deal with solar energy, solar, wind, hybrid energy, generally speaking. And there we have undertaken through non-CSR fund, and I really want to highlight that bit. While a lot of work gets done through CSR funding, which can be classified in the just transition area, but very specifically through non-CSR fund, we have actually undertaken a project to skill workers, both blue-collar workers as well as some highly skilled workers in the energy domain. And none of them are mandated to join Mahindra, so they are free to work with any organization out there. And almost about 10,000 plus people have been trained. There's a dedicated center around this in Maharashtra, and the idea is to further scale on this work. So obviously, we also benefit from this. Some of these workers come and work for us, but generally speaking, it helps create employment. If I were to immediately jump to a different sector, the transportation sector. So we again have a fairly dominant market share in the electric vehicle ecosystem, especially 3-wheelers, which are often very similar to the example Anjali gave, is owned by the driver partners, and they in turn work for corporations to ferry, let's say, last mile connectivity. So there again, we have undertaken a variety of activities, both for especially women in this case, to be able to drive these 3-wheelers through ease of financing, skilling, etc. And at the same time, also the supporting ecosystem of electric vehicle delivery. The third thing that I'll come to, that it's not just sufficient in the just transition context to only talk about the worker ecosystem. I think what's also important is that as we move this transition, how do we deal with the MSME ecosystem? So when it comes to, let's say, the ICE ecosystem, a lot of, there's about 2,000 supplier partners that Mahindra have. Many of them are MSMEs. So if you don't take them along in the journey from ICE to EVs, indirectly it will lead to job losses, income losses, etc. for the larger community. So we have also been undertaking projects to bring them along in the journey, all the supplier partners. How can we sort of upgrade them from the ICE supplier ecosystem to a EV supplier ecosystem? So that's the general idea. The last point that I'll sort of maybe end with is that it's while we often talk about what the corporate can do in the Indian context, I think I do want to bring in a little bit of a global flavor, in the sense that if you were to take a slightly global view on climate impact and just transition, generally speaking, for every dollar that you spend in climate action in India, the amount of action, both social and environmental action, that you can get done is a lot higher. So as a community, I think that's the messaging we should really take out there, that how do we bring more of global climate funds, which is targeted towards climate action and just transition to India. Thank you.
That's excellent. I think, yeah, really great to hear those practical examples, and maybe, I guess, picking up on your last point around how do we kind of bring in more kind of global funding in this space. It's as if you knew. That ties very nicely to my question to you, Rajiv. And I know that you and the team have been working on, I guess, building an ethically governed ecosystem to attract international capital into India's climate space. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what global investors are telling you about what maybe needs to change in India's investment environment to make it more credible and investable for climate and just transition projects. And then, kind of similar to what was being mentioned, maybe what role can coalitions of investors play in making these just transition goals viable and scalable. So anything you can share around that would be excellent.
Yeah, I'm audible. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for, I think, great question. And, once again, being a part of IGIF, kudos to this team, which is consistently bringing people together from across the world, time and again, and having seen this journey. But I think your query is a very contextual one. And after listening to you all ladies and, Ankit, I think starting from the piece what he mentioned, Ankit, and that resonates with me, having been part of the India corporate world, or India Inc., as I say, for over near 3+ decades. Purpose drives profit, and he said it, that's what Anand Mahindra and these people believe in. But I think that resonates across the corporate world and across the family offices where we work with. And Parinama, as Guneet and I, we are building this ecology for not just for India, but I think how we can partner with communities, with family offices, with institutional investors for social capital across the world. And there are 3 pieces which Parinama resonates with. One, obviously bringing in these family offices and others to India who at times hesitate because of certain challenges in the ecosystem which has been there. But obviously this is not the forum to discuss about, but we are pulling the right governance mechanism, the right structures, the right policy aspects, the right ways to pull these pieces together. And at the same time, to synergize in an AIF mechanism with the right easy entry and exit both. And then the other piece which you mentioned that in terms of collaboration is the entire core theme with which Parinama has been institutionalized, and that's the way we would be taking it forward. And every drop counts, every individual, everybody, because it's not that it's that you could be a lone ranger or just take the lead on your own, because it's like and I relate with, it's like parenting, and parenting for everybody who has a child or who has siblings who are young, it's never an easy one, because even though you have your parents, grandparents there, but every generation, every time is different, and every contextual situation is different. So it is not right what has been historical piece that will stay, because a lot of these pieces need to be, I would say, it's like a journey, every day you learn something new every time, and every drop, every piece counts, as we've seen over the last, I would say 10+ years, when India has started to transition into a major force in the world and where its voice carries weight, is changing the industrial corridors which are coming up, the kind of ecosystem what we are focusing in terms of green energy space, because India is a energy deficient nation, and all these places, new innovative approaches where the capital, and mind you, it's not the capital coming in from large institutions or including social capital in some way, so that the smaller societies can be generating enough energy for their own needs. And every place, every project is got to be done differently. But I think the bigger piece which is important for us to attract capital, enable the right policies, and also the information, the analytics around all this, which is what yesterday I was at a at a round table, and I was talking about that. It is just not the aspect of a descriptive and diagnostic analytics. It is predictive, prescriptive. And till the time we don't collaborate on these data pieces, we don't educate each other, we don't share transparently, it is not going to make that change. And that is what capital is looking at from India. That is what they are looking at. Obviously there are challenges, and these are all over the world. And I'm not saying India is to be earmarked for certain failures of certain gaps in terms of corporate governance. We have seen in the best of the Western world, the gaps on the. But I think those need to be part of the DNA. Those need to be part of that engagement. Policies and all that will come into play. But how do we create that end-to-end ecosystem and partner and that's where the investments will come in. And every investment is important, whether we do it maybe $100,000 or we do it $100 million or we do $1 billion, because this is one journey which has got to get maybe trillions of dollars. India, even if it was to get $1 trillion every year, a $4 trillion economy getting $1 trillion, it will be not sufficient. Maybe today we just getting 5% of that. That's a great start. And building all these together, everybody in this room has to be the owner. It's not that you and I have got to say that he does it or she does it. Everybody is got to, and we need to share openly. We need to enable. And if there is an opportunity, share that. Maybe I'm putting in $5. You interested? Or maybe I'm putting in $50. So that's where it'll build the ecosystem and keep pulling in. And the moment it starts to make money, people will see. And as I always believed, and skills are like hearts, they go where they're wanted. The same way as money, when it's got to have. So social capital separate, philanthropic capital separate, but I think that's the way we are looking at as Parinama, and we are objective around it, but I think pleasure to engage. Thank you.
Brilliant, that's great, and and thank you for exploring that. I think it's important to have some of that context around what's needed for engagement, especially international, on some of these topics. And we're kind of starting to touch on it towards the end there, but I think it'd be good to kind of shift our focus a little bit to, I guess, the business case for just transition, and how do we translate that into business value and investor confidence. So I'd love to just touch a little bit more on the financial and strategic side of the conversation. And Chaitra, I'm going to come back to you next, but just maybe touching on the research and the report you've released, it'd be great to understand, I guess, what evidence or early examples help quantify the business case for just transition, whether it's risk reduction, incentives, or long-term resilience. And then also maybe if you have any thoughts on financing mechanisms like blended finance that can maybe help in this space.
Sure, thanks for your question. I think maybe on the initial question, I'll focus a little bit more on the risk side and on ecosystem building as a way to work on the business case. So the way that we have positioned our research on place-based just transition is almost thinking about if just transition financing would be like a condition for operational and political feasibility. So can we think about a way to fund just transition projects because they are operationally important and because it is a condition for political feasibility. So one sort of example that comes to mind, if anyone's familiar with transition minerals as a sector, is that in the lithium triangle, there was a primary researcher who sort of reported on almost the privatization of rights because the state involvement is lacking in that region. And things like education, things like health, things like that come under broader social safety nets were being provided by the corporate that was functioning in that region. So an investor sort of really needs like a mandate to invest on just transition in that particular region, because if not, then there's like a privatization of rights. So that is one thing. And on the business case, I think a lot of us who have worked on the investment case on the asset management side, we have a way of looking at controversies, but I think that's sort of changing. So people are the buy side is going one step below and looking at what is the typology of costs when it comes to social conflicts. So if I had to give you an example, like an investor of ours is looking at, okay, there have been social conflicts when it comes to transition in sectors, so the renewable sectors. So there are delays, there are material damage, there is loss of productivity, there is broader sort of costs that are associated with social conflicts. So that sort of tests like, okay, there is a business case towards investing in the social side. And then the second part on ecosystem building, right? I think I don't have a lot to say on incentives just yet, but because there needs to be like a policy mandate. But on the ecosystems building side of things, what strikes me as important is that one sort of example that we cover in the report is also if, say for example, there is an investment you make, and I think we covered a lot of mobility, so maybe sticking to that theme. If there's a bus fleet that an investor wants to invest, can the investor think about also creating a side project on investing in funding skills for drivers to drive the bus, or looking at electric sort of storage assembly, like looking at that aspect. So because you're sort of stimulating an entire sort of sequence of stakeholders, so you're stimulating the suppliers, you're stimulating people who are going to work on that fleet, you're stimulating customers. So it's almost like a reinforcing mechanism. So that's another way of thinking about ecosystem building. So to end that thought, I would say you're not only financing one asset, you're looking at it from an ecosystem, and that sort of reinforces. One of the other case studies that we put together in the report that I'd urge you all to look at is ESCOM's case study. So there's one sort of metric that really makes sense, where the person said that, when it comes to decarbonizing, when it comes to fossil fuel decarbonizing, if you pair renewable energy in that region, it's not enough to absorb the community and workforce of that region. So they did an exercise to understand, okay, there's a cost per job. Can we look at, okay, we are repowering that region, but we're also looking at putting people into things in alternative complementary sectors like agrivoltaics, like welding. So this was a sort of hard lesson that a Just Transition office of ESCOM really learned over time, that paired renewable energy is not enough to absorb the workforce and the community and the municipality of that region. So that is another way of thinking about it. And then maybe on the last one, on blended finance, I think one statistic that blended finance from the private side only contributes around 15 billion globally. That's a small number, right? So I think to scale that has been like a very big challenge. One sort of positive thing that came to mind is like one of our members also recently from the credit side released a report, like the Amundi from the credit side released a report on blended finance. So when an investor like that comes with blended finance ecosystem, thinking about it, that's important. So some sort of ways that we're thinking about how to sort of solution and think more on blended finance with all its challenges has been on thinking how to make it more replicable. They're really complex structures. How do you invest at scale? How do you make it replicable? The second part is don't talk about just transition. Can you prove it? Like, can you sort of devise like what exactly the blending or the social concessional capital or the guarantee is going to result in terms of an outcome? And maybe just not over-engineering, like the capital stack is another sort of outcome on blended finance that we're thinking about. Of course, it's really early days. These are young pilot models, a lot of work to be done to explore those, but one sort of actor that is doing some good work in this space has been on catalytic matching by AVPN. So we're keen to sort of build on work on that side. Thanks.
Amazing, amazing, thank you. And I think, yeah, really interested to hear those points around maybe building it in as kind of a licensed operator as part of the operational conditions. I think the ecosystem point is really pertinent, and I've heard that come up in another discussion about that being a wider consideration, something that's a bit practical. And in blended finance, I think your points are really great there, and I think there's a lot more for us to explore in terms of the practicalities and what are some of the other not obvious barriers around getting some of those structures together. So maybe, Anjali, coming back to you and picking up on your point previously around, I guess, the importance of considering risk sharing and maybe even the access to finance for some of the smaller participants. You mentioned your drivers. How do you think investors and maybe governments work better together to kind of enable inclusivity? And maybe is this another key way of building the business case for Just Transition?
Thank you. I think right at this very point in time, it's not so much the finance that's the barrier in itself. It is the lack of focus and the lack of time that are actually two interesting barriers. And let me just explain. I think if we took a more, so corporate value chains are complex. ours, despite, even if I were to take just the food delivery business, at one level we have Amazon Web Services, right? And so they're a very large supplier, and really I can't dictate what they do. And then I have the individuals who I just described who power my food deliveries, right? So all of these are very specific value chains that are that bear no resemblance really to each other, and therefore let's say that we, what I haven't seen happen, I'd love to be proved wrong, or maybe it's happened very selectively, is a thorough study of each value chain and who actually sits in it and what their capacity and capability is. And if investors like yourselves and government could come together to say that yes, absolutely, there is a need to achieve a transition in this sector. The technology appears to be available, the timing seems right, and of course there are all these additional pressures of air pollution. Let's give this a go. I think the first step would be to actually jointly study what is in that value chain. Who is in that value chain, very importantly? Who are the kinds of people in that value chain? What is their paying capacity? What is their awareness of green technologies? And what realistically needs to happen to achieve achieve a transition in such a way that those very same actors don't experience a loss of livelihood. And I'm saying this because, look, it's very easy, given, the threat of mandates and EV mandates, etc. It's very easy for companies like ours to say, okay, that's it. We're going to go with third-party transportation providers. Henceforth, we're only going to give out contracts to people who are, say, renting EVs or managed deliveries for us. But is that what we actually want? Do we want individuals who are directly earning from platforms like ours to transition into, do we want to introduce intermediaries and take away that economic value from their pockets and transfer it to intermediaries? It's a question we must ask ourselves, because that is an element of a just transition, right? Who benefits? And how much of this benefit is going towards more and more organized players, right? So I think that, but if that is not an outcome we want, and we actually want the providers and the smallest providers of goods and services to benefit from this transition, we must first understand their role, we must understand their constraints, and these kinds of studies should then therefore inform how this transition needs to play out, how much experimentation needs to happen before we can bring in mandates, because mandates have a tendency of forcing people to adopt a technology that is not fully evolved, right? We've not yet seen how efficient certain technologies can be, or we've not yet seen the most appropriate models emerge, and it might be a rush job. So I do think we need to ask ourselves these questions, because we are seeing that if we don't, we will not actually get the outcomes that we want as a society, right? Do we really want green technology to drive more fissures and make our society more unequal than it is at present? I don't think so. Then we will end up in a situation of extreme civil unrest. And that's not a pretty outcome for anyone, investors included.
Thank you so much, Anjali. And I think, yeah, it's great to articulate it in that way, in terms of, and I think that's the challenge, isn't it? That we're trying to move forward. There's solutions that are popping up, and on the face of it, it's great, but really understanding how is that impacting in terms of some of those decisions that are laid out in front of you, and how is that, I guess, the cost and the risk being equally shared or not, as the case might be. Ankit, maybe coming back to you to kind of build on this a little bit more from the perspective of Mahindra, and looking at maybe how do you evaluate or how do you consider the ROI of sustainability and inclusion initiatives that maybe don't show immediate financial returns but are critical for your, I guess, long-term competitiveness? And maybe, like, are there any partnership models that you're aware of that have helped demonstrate both impact and financial value for you?
No, absolutely. So I'm going to pick a new industry. I think when you're working in 20 different industries, there's a lot of interesting examples. So moving from renewables and electric vehicle ecosystem, I'm going to move to the farmer ecosystem. So we sell tractors, we sell a lot of other farm equipment. There's an agri-services business in the group. And generally speaking, the farmer ecosystem is one that is, let's say, most at risk from climate. And at the end of the day, if we don't help the farming community in India adapt to climate change and be more resilient and adapt to it, there is going to be a direct impact to future revenue. So there's a very solid business case to ensure that this community thrives. So while we do a number of things, I'm going to focus on some of the smaller, tiny businesses. There's a business called Mahindra EPC, which is a drip irrigation business. Drip irrigation is one of the most effective solutions when it comes to dealing with water-related problems, rainfall, change in rainfall patterns, etc. And while the business as a whole does not really make any money per se, very tiny, but the kind of impact that it delivers to the farming community is immense. Similarly, there's a couple of other businesses which deal with different types of seeds. So rice seeds in particular, we are a rice-eating country, a large part of the country. Potatoes, you have bulbs of potatoes. So there also we have done some global partnerships where we have bought varieties of rice and potato seeds, which are a lot more climate resilient, consume less water for growing. That's another example. There's another piece of work that happens in the farm machinery ecosystem, which is to do with helping the rice farmers again, in this case, adopt better practices of rice. So there's something called alternate wetting and drying, which uses less water and again leads to much lesser methane emissions. Generally speaking, rice is known to be a climate intense crop. So there are a variety of other practices such as direct seeding of rice that can be done. So we do a variety of, we sell machinery, but also do a lot of work to promote these methods around it. So the point I'm trying to make is that sector by sector, there is a lot of things that can be done, which is good for business and good for the community. The only thing to keep in mind, I guess, in many of these examples is that it's always not possible to show a quarter-on-quarter impact. Many of these things, the business case is much, much stronger when you take a slightly long-term view. So for this part of the ecosystem, as well as for, I'm going to just jump track and give another example for your supply chain partners as well. So another piece of work that we did recently was to do with the tire ecosystem. So we again buy a lot of tires, about 3,000 crore of tires every year. And one of the key components of tire for the OEMs of tires is natural rubber. So again, working to ensure that that ecosystem is also survives, and both the people and the sort of the trees and the forestation around it is taken care of, is in the long-term good interest of the country. So I think of the company. So I think the point again I'm trying to reiterate is that the moment you take a slightly long-term view, and I'm not talking 20 years, but even a 3 to 5 year view on many of these aspects, you suddenly realize that it's always about good for business and good for the planet and good for the people associated with it.
That's brilliant. And I think that's a really important point to make, is that we also just need to consider how we're measuring these things, and there may be shifts that are needed within our kind of business models to take account of that, so that we understand the value of the impact that we're actually creating, and also the point that you raised about kind of a sector by sector approach in terms of maybe spelling out what's needed, what those examples look like. It ties to some of the work that we're doing with IIC at the moment, taking kind of a deep dive into textile and apparel as a sector with that kind of lens. So maybe, Rajiv, I might just swing back to you just to kind of maybe bring in that kind of viewpoint on, we were talking about, I guess, transparency and what those returns look like as a kind of recurring theme to attracting long-term capital. And maybe just based on your experience with interacting with, I guess, the broader ecosystem and investors, do you maybe see, is there a growing appetite for them to maybe integrate some of these considerations into their investing, or is there anything that I guess is holding them back from interacting with the topic of just transition or into their practices?
Thank you. I think, obviously, a great ask, and that's always a dilemma, especially for the big capital. But looking at so much wisdom which has been just shared by the entire panel, I think as I go back, obviously, India is at a very crucial point in the world at this stage, both geopolitically and otherwise as a clear market, which is in the process of really unwinding itself. Takeoff will still take some more journey, but unwinding, putting the entire ecosystem together, all this requires capital. And all this also requires, as we know, India in many ways can be the food bowl for a major market of the world, and this is where one of our core economic pieces coming together. And there are companies, obviously, Ankit has spoken about Mahindra's in terms of their agri, support mechanism, which is huge. ITC, for another one, which has created such a huge ecosystem and is constantly doing. Then there is the infrastructure piece where a lot of things are shifting from the traditional energy space, of the Coal India or the PSUs of the energy space in India, and then companies like or groups like JSW, which are in the process of changing the typical mining and the energy paces to the new ways. All this will require huge capital. And then and there are companies like NTPC, which is creating a new paradigm shift versus the thermal energy into. And all these are going to require, energy. India is an energy deficient nation, and it requires, that's another big space. The mining pieces, which is changing, the agri, which is huge, infrastructure, which is huge. All this is auguring well. But the other pieces where significant amount of dollars have to go into, I would say reskill. I'm not saying unskill, but reskill, because there's a lot of workforce, and we don't want industries or opportunities where with the AI, with the digitization, that people are losing huge jobs. Obviously it's a space, and that's where another significant dollars have to go in that area. And it's not just the individual, the society, the entire policy frameworks which has got to come together. All this is going to get in, like I said, the social capital, the philanthropic capital, and the family offices. They're huge, because family offices, by all means, every country you go across the globe, maybe just about top 3% to 5% of the families really control the entire capital of that nation. And we can talk about it. But where will that find its way back? It's got to find way back in some of these. And what we need to do, as I said, the digitization will help, the transparency in terms of a lot of data, etc., which will help the governance mechanism by and large again and again. And that the more we are able to showcase, to build across the entire ecosystem, that right from the grassroots level, and it's got to be a pyramid-based approach. Even smaller companies which are coming into these areas as the transition is happening are being supported with the right backbone. And as this builds up into a huge, the big capital has to percolate down. But all these aspects and more, I would say, structured engagement, collaboration that we bring about, it's automatic, and this way this capital is bound to, because there's no other place. In Japan, you have got to pay money to keep your money safe, not the other way around. And here the RO is etc. And the entrepreneurs like, obviously Anjali, and this is a new economy area, and we are all loving the way the entire transition is happening, So it's like the typical brick and mortar, bigger ones, the newer ones, and all have to synergize in many ways. And capital will find its way back into the country, I have absolutely no doubt. We just need to go back on our core, our ethos, our value systems, create the governance, create opportunities, engage everybody. it's bound to be. And to, in the words of our honorable Prime Minister, building it up from a 4 trillion to 10, 15, 20 trillion is just a matter of time. Let the world wait and watch. I think we fellow folks, Indians who are here, and we welcome obviously the global teams, etc., to come work, collaborate. It's going to be, it's a matter of time. Hopefully we'll see it in our lifetime that India is a 20, 30 trillion dollar economy. Yeah.
Fantastic, fantastic. Okay, well, I think we're just coming on time now, so maybe just to wrap up, I want to say huge thank you to the panelists. It's been such an interesting discussion, hearing from kind of, I guess, your perspective, Rajiv, in terms of that overall ecosystem. How do we bring people in, but how do we develop that economy within India? Chaitra, it's been great to hear some of your perspectives on the work that AIGCC has done on your latest report, and really encourage people to engage with that and learn more about what just transition means specifically for India, also in comparison to other markets. So thank you for sharing those perspectives. And then both Anjali and Ankit, I think really important to hear practical examples, what's the reality on the ground. And I think we need these conversations to kind of ground ourselves in those challenges, to also identify where the solutions come from. And just a big thank you to the team at IIC. I think it's really important that we're having these discussions as part of the India Green Investment Forum, so we don't lose sight of overlaying these social considerations and impacts into all of our exciting opportunities that are coming along in the green space. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you to all our panelists and Ashling for tying it so well. This session beautifully highlighted how India's industrial transition can be both climate smart and people-centric,